Why Putin is not ready to meet with Zelensky, and may never be. The prospect of a direct meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been a subject of speculation since the outbreak of the war in 2022. For many observers, such a summit could mark the beginning of serious peace efforts and an end to the bloodshed. Yet, despite repeated calls from Kyiv and encouragement from international mediators, Putin has consistently refused the idea of sitting down with Zelensky. The reasons behind this reluctance are rooted in geopolitics, military strategy, personal animosity, and domestic politics, and all indications suggest that such a meeting may never happen. From the Russian perspective, a refusal to engage directly with Zelensky is part of a broader narrative. The Kremlin has repeatedly portrayed Ukraine as a Western proxy rather than a sovereign state. By labeling Zelensky as a puppet of Washington and Brussels, Putin undermines his legitimacy as an independent decision-maker. Meeting him face-to-face would contradict this narrative, as it would imply recognition of Ukraine's political agency. For Putin, this is unacceptable because it runs counter to the image he has cultivated of Russia not fighting Ukraine itself but the broader West. Moscow's preconditions for negotiations present another insurmountable obstacle. Russia insists that Kyiv recognize the annexation of Crimea and 4 other occupied regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. Ukraine, on the other hand, has made it clear that it will not surrender any of its territories and has enshrined this position into law. Zelensky has publicly declared that no talks with Putin are possible while Russian troops remain on Ukrainian soil. This stalemate leaves no room for compromise, and it ensures that Putin sees no benefit in holding direct talks that are doomed to fail from the outset. The course of the war has hardened both leaders' positions. Ukrainian sacrifices on the battlefield have only deepened the resolve to defend sovereignty, while Russia's framing of the conflict as a mission to denazify Ukraine and protect Russian-speaking populations has entrenched its maximalist demands. For Putin, sitting at the same table as Zelensky would undermine years of propaganda depicting him as an illegitimate leader controlled by the West. The optics would damage Putin's carefully crafted image of strength and dominance, especially at home where his authority relies heavily on projecting control. Leverage is another key consideration. Putin calculates timing very carefully, and he is unlikely to negotiate at a moment when Russia feels it has military momentum. Even if the battlefield situation were to turn against him, a meeting with Zelensky would carry the risk of signaling weakness. In diplomacy, optics can be as important as substance, and for Putin, acknowledging Zelensky as a counterpart could be interpreted as a concession both domestically and internationally. Putin's personal leadership style also plays a role in his refusal. He prefers tightly controlled settings, scripted outcomes, and negotiations conducted through intermediaries. Direct talks with Zelensky carry too many risks, including the possibility of being pressured publicly into compromises. For a leader who values predictability and control above all else, such a scenario is intolerable. This explains why Moscow relies on lower-level officials and trusted allies to conduct exploratory talks rather than exposing Putin to unpredictable outcomes. International dynamics provide further incentives for Putin to avoid Zelensky. The United States, the European Union, and NATO allies have all backed Ukraine's demand that Russia withdraw before peace talks can begin. This Western support strengthens Kyiv's position but also gives Moscow a convenient excuse to claim that there is nothing to negotiate directly with Ukraine. Instead, Putin often seeks dialogue with larger powers like China, Turkey, or the United States, framing the conflict as a global confrontation rather than a bilateral dispute. By bypassing Zelensky, Putin emphasizes his view that the real negotiation is with the West, not Ukraine. Mistrust between the two leaders further diminishes any chance of meaningful dialogue. Zelensky has repeatedly pointed to Russia's violations of the Minsk Accords and other past agreements as proof that Putin cannot be trusted. For his part, Putin sees Zelensky as unpredictable and emboldened by Western backing, making any real concessions unlikely. Without trust, even a symbolic meeting would achieve little and could backfire politically for both leaders. Domestic politics also weigh heavily on the decision. Zelensky's credibility depends on his ability to stand firm against Russian aggression. Meeting Putin without securing clear gains could weaken his political standing at home and abroad. For Putin, any summit could anger hardliners who demand total victory in Ukraine. Appearing to compromise with Zelensky could be perceived as betrayal by nationalist factions within the Kremlin, risking internal dissent. Both leaders therefore face enormous political costs if a meeting produces nothing tangible, making the risk greater than the potential reward. Strategically, prolonging the war may serve Putin's broader interests. By keeping the conflict alive, He hopes to weaken Western unity, drain Ukrainian resources, and wait for political changes in Europe or the United States that might favor Russia. A premature meeting with Zelensky could disrupt this strategy by raising expectations of compromise. By refusing direct talks, Putin signals that he is not desperate for peace and can outlast both Ukraine and its allies. History also suggests that wars do not always end with direct summits between leaders. The Korean War, for example, concluded with an armistice signed by generals, not presidents. If the Ukraine conflict eventually results in a ceasefire or frozen front lines, it may be settled by intermediaries rather than by Putin and Zelensky personally. In such a scenario, the two leaders may never meet face to face, and the war could effectively end without them ever shaking hands. In conclusion, Putin's refusal to meet with Zelensky is rooted in a complex mix of political narratives, military strategy, personal leadership style, mistrust, and domestic constraints. Recognizing Zelensky as an equal, making concessions, or risking political backlash all run counter to Putin's interests. Unless there is a dramatic shift on the battlefield or a major change in international dynamics, the chances of a Putin-Zelensky summit remain remote. For now, and perhaps indefinitely, the war will continue to be shaped by indirect negotiations, proxy diplomacy, and military realities rather than a historic handshake between the two men.